Maintaining legacy and history is an important thing. We have to document where we came from and where we're going. And I believe that that connection needs to stay and be remembered like a time capsule, because if history gets lost, it's just not right.
My name is Karson Hegrenes, and this is the story of my family and the 12 days we spent traveling around Norway together.
My name is Ralph Hegrenes.
My name is Avery Hegrenes.
My name is Scott Hegrenes.
Laura Hegrenes.
Mary Alice Hegrenes.
I'm a Hegrenes.
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 We are the Hegrenes family. We live all over the United States, from Minnesota to California, from Idaho to Florida. We're American, but our last name isn't.
When you've got the name Hegrenes, and you've got to spell it for almost everybody that you run into in your life that doesn't know you, you realize you're from a different ethnic background, I guess, Norwegian being that background. So it forces you to kind of look into your roots a little bit, say, why am I like this? Why do I have this weird name?
Around 120 years ago, my great-great-grandparents came to the United States from Norway. I grew up knowing my family heritage was Norwegian. I would always hear about how beautiful Norway was, and I'd always read about how Norway was one of the happiest countries in the world. So I fell in love with this idea of Norway I had in my head, and I took pride in my heritage. I knew that someday I wanted to visit the country that I felt such a strong connection to. So when my family started discussing a potential family trip to Norway, I was excited.
I am Barry Hegrenes. I was more or less the instigator of the sojourn to Norway for the 14 of us that went. I am a musician and an actor. I've been retired from the day job type of thing for about 10 years. Over the years, it just became kind of an itch to find out more about our roots, this crazy name Hegrenes.
My name is Scott Hegrenes. My brothers are Burke and Barry. I am a retired biology professor. I currently live in San Diego, California, where I am a bus tour operator. I teach conservation to the zoo guests by driving them around the zoo and showing them the exhibits. The impetus of this all started the day after Lexi and I got married, and the family was all there at our house. We were hanging out in the back deck and talking about dreams, and we said, hey, are we ever going to visit Norway? And we talked about it and said, well, let's really do it. Let's look into it. When I was younger, my parents made this sojourn to Norway and had great things to say. And so I always envisioned, like, one day when I'm old, I hate to say that I'm old, but maybe one day I'll do that.
My grandparents, Bob and Phyllis Hegrenes, traveled to Norway in 1998, 25 years ago. They came with Bob's older brother, Dick Hegrenes, and his wife, Marge. As part of their trip, they visited the tiny village of Hegrenes and our family's namesake farm where my great-great-grandfather Andrew lived, and Nydal, where my great-great-grandmother Louisa lived. They also reunited with relatives from both families who still lived on the farms where Andrew and Louisa grew up.
I'm Burke Hegrenes, son of Robert and Phyllis Hegrenes. I remember when they came back, they showed us all the pictures and stuff. And so I remember that they had this picture of them by the sign that said Hegrenes pointing that way. So that was my goal this time, was I got to find that sign and take a picture at that same sign.
My only dream or whatever was to go finally find Hegrenes, Norway, and not only walked where my father had walked, but where my great-grandfather Andrew came from.
Bob and Phyllis and Dick and Marge were not the first in our family to make the pilgrimage back to Hegrenes. In 1966, 64 years after Andrew came to America, Andrew's oldest son, my great-grandfather Peter Nels Hegrenes, and my great-grandma Evelyn visited Hegrenes. They saw the Hegrenes farm and met several of Peter's Norwegian cousins. 6 years later, in June 1972, Peter's younger brother Malvin Hegrenes and his wife Ruth visited.
My name is Ralph Hegrenes. I'm an old guy, age 75, been in Anthem, Arizona, which is north central Phoenix, for 23 years. In my spare time, I play as much golf as I can and a little bit of guitar. My parents, Melvin and Ruth, went there 50 years ago and just raved about how much fun that was, how nice it was to meet some relatives and to see that Hegrenes farm. They just thoroughly loved the trip. We saw a lot of pictures from that trip and have always wanted to go.
In a letter to family, Malvin recounts the trip. He and Ruth took a 6-day tour around Norway from Oslo to Bergen. Along the way, they saw the beauty of Norway's countryside, and afterwards, they spent several days in Hegrenes visiting family and enjoying their generous Norwegian hospitality. At the time of their visit, Malvin had 15 first cousins who were still living in the area around Hegrenes, and he and Ruth met 14 of them.
A number of relatives came out of the woodwork. They talked about a fairly good-sized gathering that took place. And my dad used to rave about a gentleman named Nagnar that he was in touch with in those days.
Mal also said the Norwegians remembered Peter and Evelyn's visit 6 years prior and hoped more American relatives would come. When Bob and Phyllis and Dick and Marge visited 26 years later, many of the same Norwegians welcomed them to Hegrenes. But in 2023, it had now been 25 years since our family last visited Hegrenes. Peter, Evelyn, Mal, Ruth, Dick, Bob, and Phyllis have all passed away, and many of the Norwegians who had welcomed them to Hegrenes had likely also left us. Would our Norwegian relatives remember those visits? Would they welcome us like they did in the past?
I started contacting my Aunt Marge and got some names and numbers from her. So I filled out some letters, got some international stamps, and one of those hit because I got an email. I think the first one was from Ingebjorg, saying that we got your message and we'd be happy to have you here.
Ingebjorg, Ralph's second cousin, was only 18 years old when she met Malvin and Ruth as they visited Hegrenes. And she also met Bob and Phyllis and Dick and Marge when they came 26 years later. Once we heard back from her, we knew that we would be able to reunite with our Norwegian relatives like the generations before us. So, we finalized our plans and bought our plane tickets. 14 plane tickets, to be exact.
I'm Jen Flaw. I'm an author and speaker and a musician, and I went to Norway and married my sweetie, Barry Hegrenes, who I call Bear.
On top of planning our heritage trip, Barry also had something special planned with Jen, a small wedding ceremony in Hegrenes.
We had been together just about 12 years leading up to the trip to Norway.
2019, when we talked about taking this trip and taking the whole Hegrenes clan, Bear and I talked about maybe we could do like a commitment thing there. I was in Florida. I got back to Prescott and we went out to dinner probably the second night I was here.
I took a picture of the ring that was being made for Jen and I folded it up in a piece of paper. I told the waiter, I said, just bring this over on a plate and indicate that these are the specials. She looked at it and then she was, wah, oh my God.
I was shocked and he's like, don't worry, I've got it all planned. You just need to bring the dress and a song.
My name is Lexi Lyons Hegrenes. I am married to Scott Hegrenes. I work as a realtor. We live in California. Delighted to be a part of the Hegrenes family. It's fascinating to me that the people who came before us made such huge decisions to leave their country and start an entirely new life in a different country, in a day and age where realistically, once you leave, you can assume you may never see your family again. The idea that your family might actually be able to be in contact with distant relatives there and actually meet them there, that was just a whole nother level of a reason to go and an excitement about going.
I'm Laura Hegrenes, and I'm married to Burke. Former teacher, Kind of retired right now and living in Woodbury, 3 kids.
Before the trip, Laura put together an elaborate itinerary with all the information we would ever need as travelers.
The itinerary came from the travel agency, but then as I started looking at it more carefully, I'm like, there's not a tour guide with us, and we need to know how to get from here to like the bus station to the next thing. If we just left that for the moment, I would suck all the joy out of our entire trip for everybody because I'd be so worried. So to save everybody a headache, I put the itinerary together.
My name is Mary Alice Hegrenes, 2 S's. I'm Ralph Hegrenes' wife. I'm a retired school teacher, having taught a variety of grades and subjects. My happy place is with my grandchildren. Ralph and I have been married 50 years, and we've probably talked about going for 35 years. And when it came up, Ralph said, well, I don't think we can do this. And we slept on it, and in the morning, my thought was, if we don't do it now, will we ever do it? I think we need to just go. It felt like it was a necessary part of our history that we needed to know.
When previous generations of our family visited Hegrenes, they didn't bring their children. But this time, my cousins and I were fortunate to be able to come along on the trip.
My name is Avery Hegrenes. I'm a daughter of Barry Hegrenes and the mother to Aubrielle Hegrenes. Being a mother of a 10-year-old going out of the country, it definitely presented its unique set of challenges. That was my first time traveling with a child outside of the country. I was excited to see part of my heritage again, and being able to experience that with showing my child the different kinds of, whether it be religious, whether it be scenery, whether it be the way they eat, the different types of foods.
I'm Logan. Right now I'm working in IT at the Mayo Clinic. I'm a Hegrenes, the son of Burke Hegrenes, who is the son of Robert Hegrenes.
I'm Michaela. I just graduated from the university and now I'm working part-time.
I'm Kyle. I'm currently a student at the University of St. Thomas.
Coming into this trip, I was honestly a little bit worried about how many people were going. Like the group of 14 people, I thought it could turn into a disaster almost, but I was very pleasantly surprised that that was not the case. My mindset going in was just to kind of go with the flow and let the itinerary itself play out and just enjoy my time being present in the moment there in Norway.
What I was looking for most was just like to be somewhere where you could have more of a sense of adventure than when you're just in your own home.
I knew it was going to be beautiful, so I was just kind of excited for how it was going to look, letting it all happen.
I went into this trip hoping to broaden my horizons a bit. I was excited to form a deeper connection with the landscapes and hundreds of years of history that converged to create me and my existence. And I was also hoping to make memories that would last a lifetime, memories that I could pass on to future Hegrenes generations. On July 7th at 8:30 in the morning at the Oslo airport, Barry and Jen board a propeller plane bound for Svolvær, a town with a population of just under 5,000 people in northern Norway's Lofoten Islands.
Svolvær is kind of at the bottom of the Arctic Circle. It's a fishing village. I just found it to be very quaint and inviting.
Couldn't believe we were there. It was, especially after so long in the planning, it was just pinch yourself moment. I found this trip that took us along the Norwegian coastline up and over to the border of Norway and Russia. It was kind of like the inner passage of Alaska, where you're cruising up and you got land on one side and islands on the other.
Among the places they visit are Kirkenes, a town near Norway's border with Russia, and the North Cape, the northernmost point in mainland Europe.
So,
Hi.
just coming to you from the top of the world.
Here, we'll show you what it looks like.
No.
The rest of us won't arrive in Norway for another week, but Barry and Jen's photos and videos have us even more excited for the trip.
It was awesome. Just the sheer beauty of Norway was beyond my expectation. It was just gorgeous.
On July 13th, Scott, Lexi, and I land at the Oslo airport at around 9 in the morning. After making our way down to the train, we enjoy a 20-minute ride into the city.
One of the things I noticed is how lush and green everything was. It reminded me of, I guess, Minnesota in the summer with all the flowers blooming and the trees fully leaved. I'd been to Europe before, so it brought back a lot of those memories. You just see the way the buildings are and the streets. Everything is just a little different.
Soon, we arrive at Oslo Central Station and head right across the street to check in at our hotel. It's time to explore Norway's capital city. Our first destination is the Vigeland Sculpture Park, a public sculpture park which Bob and Phyllis visited 25 years ago. Next, we return to central Oslo to check out the Opera House before strolling down Oslo's main pedestrian street, Karl Johans gate. Eventually, jet lag forces us to retire to bed early. That same evening, Barry and Jen return to Oslo from up north. Everyone else will be landing in Oslo tomorrow. The next morning, we're up early. After reuniting with Barry and Jen, the adults visit the Viking Ship Museum while I set out to explore some of Oslo's neighborhoods. From our hotel, I walk north to a neighborhood called Grünerløkka. I was hoping to see the street art there that I'd read about online, and I found a lot. After some walking, I ended up at a nice park with a waterfall. I was surprised just how quiet Oslo was as a city. This was my first time in any European city, and it felt much more peaceful compared to the cities I knew in America, which were noisy and filled with traffic. My walk to Grünerløkka felt safe and comfortable. In fact, all of Oslo felt quiet and safe.
I found Oslo to be very inviting, a more modern city than I expected.
Very interesting architecture. They purposely made these buildings unusual or interesting in their design.
Their public transportation was very good and clean.
I didn't see the grime or the poverty that I see in many other cities.
An international feel to it, clearly. You could tell there were people from all over the world that were there, including us.
After Grünerløkka, I made my way toward the city's newer Aker Brygge neighborhood. The shiny new condo blocks in Aker Brygge were quite the contrast from the older feel of Oslo's inner neighborhoods. After a few hours of exploring, I felt like I got a broad taste of the different areas of the city. Later, after the family touches down in Oslo, we all convene for our first dinner together in Norway on the Oslo Promenade.
We put our bags down and just immediately left and met all of you guys. And so it was like the vacation just started right away.
Maybe it's just like the excitement of being on like some kind of journey, but it did feel like more refreshing. The clouds were better. They were just like better clouds, and like the grass was just more green, and it's just exciting to be in a new place.
We spend the evening enjoying Oslo's 9 p.m. golden hour before calling it a day, as we have an exciting morning ahead of us. Like most American families, we, the Hegrenes family, are descendants of immigrants. In our case, Norwegian immigrants. The earliest Norwegians who came to America came to New York, Illinois, and Wisconsin in the early 1800s. But the largest wave of Norwegian immigration to the US was in the mid-1800s to the early 1900s. It was during this period that about 900,000 Norwegians came to America, a number frightening to the clergymen in Norway who at one point were preaching about the sin of going to America. During this period, the US was continuing its westward expansion and seizing land from indigenous people. Land west of the Mississippi River was abundant, arable, and cheap. The most important year in the story of Norwegian immigration to the United States is perhaps 1862. Two important things happened during this year. First, in May 1862, President Abraham Lincoln signed into law the Homestead Act, making it essentially free for any settler to acquire 160 acres of land as long as they were willing to improve that land. Second, in August 1862, the United States began violently expelling indigenous Dakota people from their remaining homelands in Minnesota in a war that lasted 5 weeks. Years before, in 1851, the US government and the Dakota signed the Treaty of Traverse des Sioux, in which the Dakota, then facing hunger and desperate for relief, ceded 21 million acres of land in exchange for promised annuities. They were then relocated to much smaller reservations along the Minnesota River, and it was from these reservations they were violently removed in the Dakota War of 1862. The Dakota were forced further west to North and South Dakota and Nebraska. In the war's aftermath, the state of Minnesota confiscated and sold the land of these reservations. With the Dakota brutally expelled, Minnesota had a sudden surplus of land available for settlers. After the American Civil War, Norwegian immigration to the United States increased, and many Norwegians in particular settled in the abundant, fertile plains of Minnesota. Since many immigrating Scandinavians had agricultural backgrounds, it was the perfect place and perfect opportunity to establish a living. Our family's story begins in 1902, when my great-great-grandfather Andreas Hegrenes boarded a ship in Bergen, Norway, bound for the United States. Andreas was born in Jølster, Norway, in 1882, the youngest of 9 children, to Nils Johannes Crispinesen Hegrenes and Pernille Rasmusdottir Slotten. He had 6 older brothers, Kristen, Elling, Ludvig, Nils, Johannes, and Johan, and 2 older sisters, Synnøve and Nicolina. Nils and Johan had also left Norway for the United States years before Andreas did, but both of them died soon after arriving here. Andreas also had an aunt, Johanna Olina Crispinesdottir Hegrenes, who came to the US in 1865 with her husband and 5 children. During Andreas's youth in the late 1800s, Norway was a poor country with an economy largely based on fishing and farming. The Hegreneses were farmers and maintained a small farmstead near the lake Jølstravatnet in Jølster, which the family had operated since around 1550. The boys of the family worked the farm, and the women were often milkmaids and led traditional domestic lives. Laws of the time required all property to be passed on to the eldest son by right of primogeniture. Andreas, being the youngest of 7 boys, was at the bottom of the hierarchy in terms of inheritance. So, he left. He arrived in Ellis Island on June 17, 1902, with only about $50 to his name, which he changed from Andreas to Andrew. He never told anyone in his family he was leaving. The only person he told was a girl named Lovisa Nidal, his sweetheart. Unlike many other Norwegians who came to the United States, Andrew did not settle on a farmstead, but ended up in the city, in his case, Minneapolis. Andrew came to the US during a period of industrialization, as cities were growing and manufacturing jobs were in high demand. In Minneapolis, Andrew found work at the now defunct J.R. Clark Manufacturing Company, which made wooden household tools and furniture items like ironing boards, washboards, stools, and ladders. 3 years later, in 1905, Andrew sent for Lovisa. She came through Ellis Island, Americanized her name to Louisa Nidal, and the two reunited. Andrew and Louisa got married in Minneapolis in 1908 and built a house at 2901 DuPont Avenue North in North Minneapolis. My great-great-grandmother Louisa was also the youngest child in her family. Like the Hegreneses, the Nidals were farmers. They lived on land on the south shore of the lake Jølstravatnet, southwest of the Jølstravatnet. The Nidals have maintained their farm since the early 1500s and can trace their ancestry back to that time. Louisa was not the only Nidal to come to the United States. 3 of her older siblings, Johannes, Hanna Synnøve, and Severina, also came to Minnesota in the late 1800s. Johannes Nydal became a professor at Augsburg University in Minneapolis. Severina Nydal Americanized her name to Serena and became a maid at the Hill Mansion on Lake Minnetonka, west of Minneapolis. All of the American Nydals changed the spelling and pronunciation of their surname from Nydal to Nydal. On Saturday morning, as we set out to traverse Norway, there are over 4.5 million Americans of Norwegian descent living in the United States. Norway itself has a population of only about 5.4 million people, about 19% of whom are immigrants and their descendants. Andreas, Lovisa, and hundreds of thousands of other Norwegians left an economically struggling Norway over 100 years ago. But today, the country is one of the happiest and wealthiest in the world, drawing in immigrants, migrant workers, and refugees from some of the world's most economically challenged countries. Today marks the beginning of our family's 6-day trip around the country. We will spend the next 6 days seeing the best Norway has to offer. After we're done touring the country, we will be visiting Hegrenes, where, for a few days, we're hoping to explore the Hegrenes area and connect with some of our Norwegian relatives. On our last night there, we'll cap it all off with Barry and Jen's commitment ceremony. But for today, our train, the Dovrebanen, is waiting for us at Oslo Central Station. And so we set off on a quiet ride through the rolling hills of the Norwegian countryside.
Being on a train, you just get to see so much.
Nice seats, good view.
I don't think there's a flat acre in Norway. It's all hills and mountains. So everywhere you go is scenery.
Rolling hills, rolling grasslands, farmland.
It was fun to watch the grasslands and being able to see these little homes.
It was so green. The vegetation was beautiful.
We went through Lillehammer. You could see some of the ski runs. That reminded me of the Olympics of a few years back.
Once we arrive in Dombås, we switch trains to the Raumabanen and begin an ascent up to the top of the Norwegian mountains.
The trains that we were on had the big wide sightseeing windows, so everybody could look out and see all the waterfalls and the countryside farms.
It was so beautiful, unbelievably beautiful. Like, you just wanted to comment on it nonstop.
I brought books to read and everything, but that's just, I didn't really want to pick them up because I was just enjoying my time looking out the window.
Our train crosses an old bridge called Skillingbrua, and we get a great view of the Vermafoss waterfall before descending into a valley.
The vistas and the larger lakes and the fjords and it was stunning.
There wasn't a second that it wasn't beautiful.
Soon we arrive in the quaint fjord town of Åndalsnes, and we hop on a bus that takes us along the winding roads of Norway's peaceful coastal fjords.
The water went on forever and ever and ever.
Our end destination for day 1 is Ålesund, a scenic city of about 50,000 inhabitants that lies on a narrow peninsula that juts out into the North Sea. We spend the evening exploring the city on foot.
Ålesund was one of my favorite places, probably.
It was so colorful of a town. How many yellow buildings can you find? How many green buildings? How many blue buildings? It just felt like very quaint and very colorful.
I love being able to walk places and everything is very close. I can walk one direction and go to a restaurant. I can walk another direction and go to a store.
We begin day 2 of our tour of Norway with a brisk, rainy walk to the Ålesund boat terminal. We are about to embark on a cruise into the magnificent Geirangerfjord, so we're hoping the weather will be favorable. Once our boat pulls away from the harbor, we begin a cold, wet, and windy ride inland from the Norwegian coast. Soon, the sun peeks out from behind the clouds and shines a brilliant light on our boat and the surrounding landscapes.
I remember being surprised about how windy and cold it was, but I wanted to stay up on the upper deck the whole time anyway. everything got like way more expansive for me being on the water and seeing the mountains and the waterfalls. I was just like really in awe.
The sun was out for more than a couple hours.
Yeah.
And it was sparkling on the blue water, and yeah, and it was super cold and windy up at the top, but we stayed up there the whole time.
I personally am more attracted to water areas, so going on the fjords was really amazing to me. I could be there all the time. Day or night, snow or not, I'd be on the water just happy as a clam.
I've seen waterfalls and lakes and mountains before, but never put together in such a beautiful way. It was so incredible.
Waterfall after waterfall and fjord after fjord, it was just so stunning. It was beyond words. On the fjord, as we were going there, they talked to us a little bit about how people lived, how isolated they were, how they only had so many months a year when they could actually farm.
The thing I was most fascinated about were all these farms up on the mountains.
These steep walled fjords, and then sure enough, a little patch of green on top, and a tiny little house where someone is trying to make a go of it, trying to graze some goats or something. It was amazing.
A, how do you get there? And B, it's not flat, so what are you farming?
How do they get anywhere?
I don't know how they got anywhere.
Like, how do they get
Like, how do they get there to begin with? How do they go to the church every weekend?
And it was because that was like the only land that was available to them, and they just like made do with what they had.
What kind of life? Neighbors were not very close. You know, what did kids do after school? Where did they go to school? It felt like such a step back in time.
After 3 hours, our boat pulls into the Geiranger Fjord, and we pass by some of Norway's most iconic waterfalls, the Seven Sisters and the Bridal Veil.
Yeah, the highlight of that was you or somebody else saying, you know, you've seen one waterfall, you've seen them all. We must have seen 1,000 on the first day, or a few hundred anyway, and glacier-fed mountains coming down to this beautiful bodies of water. It's just stunningly gorgeous.
What really struck me is just how many waterfalls there are in Norway. It was called Seven Sisters for the 7 waterfalls, and I thought, why do they bother naming it 7? There are so many waterfalls.
We disembark at the innermost point of the fjord in the idyllic town of Geiranger.
Here we are going through this fjord, and suddenly there's this giant cruise ship parked at the end of the fjord, and so I knew, okay, there's our destination. Quaint little touristy town, all the little shops. It was just kind of nestled there in the valley. It looked very quaint and picturesque, almost like a fairy tale.
As I'm looking at this just postcard-like little village, I'm like, I could totally live here. It just accentuated how beautiful that country is.
Geiranger felt to me like the type of mystical place depicted in a halcyon children's tale or a Studio Ghibli film. After a few hours, we board our boat back to rainy Ålesund. When we first arrived in Ålesund the day before, we noticed the large hill at the foot of downtown and the long, windy staircase to reach its top. We decided that once we got back from Geiranger, we were going to hike up to the top of the hill. Just as we set out to make the trek, we're greeted by a colorful rainbow arching over the city.
Like halfway up the stairs, there was a place to stop, and seeing the whole city from there was just really cool. My favorite photos probably from that spot.
Coming out of the back of a neighborhood, you just kind of did switchbacks on these cement steps, and you went up to the top of a vista, and it overlooked the harbor and the town, and we were lucky enough to take that hike right when it was sunset.
It was kind of a gray silver sky, but the sun was shining through right on this water. It was really neat.
Ålesund is one of those places you always see photos of on the internet because of how unique and beautiful it is. So for us to be able to climb that hill and have our own versions of those photos from the same spots, it was pretty surreal. Tonight, we're staying up late to catch another boat, the Hurtigruten cruise line, our lodging for the night, and our ride to the next stop on our tour of Norway, Bergen.
My name is Peter Nels, N-E-L-S, Hegrenes Jr. I am the son of Peter Nels Hegrenes Sr. and Evelyn Ethel Hegrenes. Grandpa Hegrenes, Andrew, built his house on 2901 DuPont Avenue North.
With their new home, both in country and dwelling, Andrew and Louisa were ready to start a family. They had 4 boys, Peter, Leonard, Malvin, and Arthur. My great-grandfather, Peter Nels Hegrenes, was born in Minneapolis in 1909.
I was told growing up that he was, athletic. He was a ringer on his basketball team as a 6-foot center, played softball and other sports.
In 1930, he married Evelyn Perkins, who everyone called Perky.
Her nickname was Perky, because that's who she was. She was kind of short and full of energy.
That same year, Louisa passed away from cancer, and so Peter and Evelyn moved into the second floor of the DuPont home. Andrew, Len, Mal, and Art lived on the first floor.
They lived through the Depression there, and when my father and mother were married, they moved into this duplex and had my brother Dick.
Dick Hegrenes was born in 1932. A short while later, Peter, Evelyn, and Dick moved out of the DuPont house into a home west of Minneapolis in St. Louis Park. My grandfather, Bob Hegrenes, was born in 1936, and Peter Jr., his younger brother, was born in 1940. Soon, the family moved to Fargo, North Dakota. Peter Sr. passed away from progressive supranuclear palsy in 1974, 8 years after he and Evelyn visited Norway.
He had a neurological condition similar to ALS, where he couldn't swallow or do a lot of control of his smooth muscles, so he went downhill very fast.
The only memory I have is when he was sick at the nursing home. I just remember visiting him and he was in his bed.
He was always a very kind man, always was really good to me.
Evelyn passed away 20 years later in 1994.
She was a very outgoing person. She's the only person who ever told me that I was handsome, right? I'm like, I look just like your husband, I mean, spitting image.
Right toward the end of her years, she used to be in a ukulele club. So she and a bunch of older ladies would go to like McDonald's restaurants and they would play ukulele songs.
Andrew and Louisa's second son, Leonard Hegrenes, was born in 1911. Len joined the Navy and served in World War II. After serving, he returned to the DuPont house in North Minneapolis, where he lived his whole life.
Leonard, who never married, lived in the upstairs part, and then downstairs he rented the other end of the duplex.
Len died in 1972, only 60 years old.
The few times I was with Len, he was very quiet, very reserved. His death was labeled a suicide. They found his watch and wallet on a high span of a bridge over a river in Minnesota. He had some tenants that were fairly rough people, probably into drugs is what we think. So my cousin Peter has high suspicion that maybe he was actually murdered rather than suicide.
He just bought a new car, and then he had just got his season tickets for the Vikings. He still worked. Every day he went to work. We just cannot accept it, and the police would not give me the time of day.
Malvin Hegrenes was born in 1913. Like his older brother Len, Mal served in the Navy during World War II.
My father Malvin was the third of the 4 boys. He married Ruth, my mother. They were married for 50-some years.
Mal and Ruth would have 4 children, Nancy, Dawn, Ralph, and Janet, and they would eventually settle in Portland, Oregon.
I have 3 siblings. I'm the third of 4 siblings as well. 2 sisters and a brother.
Malvin passed away in 1999, and Ruth passed away in 2021.
My dad, with his social work background, was just a very calm and kind person. He was a social worker his whole career, and my mother was an accountant. Wonderful parents.
Arthur, the youngest son, was born in 1920. Art also joined the Navy and served in the war.
Both my dad, Malvin, and his brother, Art, were top-level athletes.
They were really, really good speed skaters. I mean, exceptional, especially Art. Art, I think, was the superior skater, and that's his claim to fame.
There's one story I was told that my father was the best speed skater at University of Minnesota or in the neighborhood or something, and some rival came up to him one day and said, "I found somebody that might be better than you," and organized some speed skating contest, and the guy that showed up was Art.
In 1951, Art married Bonnie Leneson, and they had 2 sons, Steve and Paul. They settled near Columbus, Ohio. Art passed away in 2005, and his son Paul passed away in 2020 in a tragic cycling accident. Malvin and Ruth would change the spelling of their last name from Hegrenes with 1 S to Hegrenes with a double S. Len and Art also adopted the double S spelling of Hegrenes. Peter and Evelyn kept the original spelling with 1 S.
The story that I heard is that they got tired of telling everybody how to pronounce Hegrenes.
My father, Malvin, got tired of being called Hegrenes, so he added an S.
And all 3 of the boys and their families have carried 2 S's on their names ever since.
In 1941, 11 years after Louisa's passing, Andrew remarried a woman named Rosa Anderson, and he would pass away 3 years later in 1944 from a heart attack. According to Dick and Bob, Andrew was a kind but stern man. He played the jaw harp, smoked cigars, and told stories about Norway in broken English with a Norwegian accent. Andrew and Louisa are both buried in the Crystal Lake Cemetery in North Minneapolis, 3,800 miles from where they were born in Norway. We wake up aboard the Hurtigruten on day 3 of our tour of Norway. As I look out the window, I see gray skies and gray crags peeking out of a gray ocean.
There was nothing around. It was like just water and occasionally a little island or something, and it was super foggy and misty, and it was like, where in the world are we?
We are a few hours away from our destination of Bergen, Norway's second largest city after Oslo, with about 250,000 inhabitants. As we arrive in Bergen, it's already living up to its reputation as Europe's rainiest city.
Bergen was historical. It was a mercantile hub. Germans and Danish did a lot of trading through Bergen because it was a very accessible port.
Older style, the cobblestone streets, the narrower streets, narrow alleyways.
I remember the alleyways in Bergen that were as wide maybe to get a bicycle through, and that was about it.
We decide to ride the Fløibanen, a funicular only a few blocks from our hotel. Malvin and Ruth rode this same funicular 51 years ago on their visit to Bergen. The ride is brief, maybe 5 minutes, and we're up on Fløyen Mountain, 1,000 feet above the fjord beneath us.
My baseball coach told me that I need to go to Bergen, and it was a beautiful city, and being up on top of that hill to, again, look at the whole city, that was also really cool.
That place was really cool, and I wish we got to spend more time there, because we ended up going into the forest like by ourselves, and it was like so green and lush, and it felt like a little
the mossy rocks and the mossy trees. Felt like I was in a movie, and I was gonna see like
it was
a
like
troll
trolls lived there,
troll.
And there was goats. We touched goats.
Yeah,
that was so cool. I love goats. Goats are my favorite. So when I saw goats like on the ledge there, I was like, oh, this is the best place.
After our adventure on Fløyen Mountain, my cousins and I decide to explore Bergen on foot. Among the places we see are the Rosenkrantz Tower and the Bryggen Wharf area. Something else that caught our eye walking around Bergen was all the street art. I had never seen so much of it in one place. Apparently, the city is a mecca for street artists in Norway.
The street art that we found was interesting. It was fun to just walk around the city. Norwegian cities are different from American, and it was just cool to see that difference.
Bergen had much more of an old world feel compared to Oslo, with older buildings and streets compared to the latter's myriad of hypermodern museums and apartments. Even the McDonald's in Bergen was old. Exploring Bergen gave us a taste of a different lifestyle.
It was the vibes. It was all just the vibes of just kind of walking around and pretending like you live there. A day in the life.
Day 4 of our Norway tour begins with more droning Bergen rain. But with nothing on our itinerary until midday, Logan and I decide to explore more of Bergen and buy some souvenirs. So, we venture out into the rain toward a mall across town.
That was kind of cool going to the mall. It's kind of a not really touristy place. The clerk at the mall even started talking to me in Norwegian. She didn't think I was American, so I was like, oh, nice, I'm fitting in.
At the mall, Logan picks up a watch, and I snag a Norwegian copy of Haruki Murakami's Norwegian Wood from the bookstore. Afterwards, we decide to check out the Nordnesparken, a park on the tip of Bergen's downtown peninsula, where we're treated to a lovely panoramic view of the Bifjorden encompassing the city. Soon, it's time for our big event of the day, a guided food and culture tour of Bergen. Amidst drizzling rain, we join up with everyone outside the Fisketorget, a touristy public fish market where our tour begins. For the first part of our tour, we get to try fiskekaker, or fish cakes, and a cinnamon roll with brunost before exploring the Bryggen, Bergen's old wharf area, with its iconic architecture and fascinating history.
We got to see where the old shipyard front was. Literally, you step out of your house and you are on the dock. They would throw their trash and waste out their windows, and eventually it would pack down, and so the the area in front of their house got bigger and bigger and bigger.
Next, we pass an old church before walking up the hill. We stop for some hearty lamb stew at a unique pub that used to be a public bath. After our meal, we traverse Bergen's quiet residential backstreets toward a coffee shop where we're treated with some delightfully flavorful apple cider. Finally, the tour wraps up in another old pub.
We wound up at this old bar that had this wine cellar in the basement. The ambiance and the lighting, and it was candlelit, and it was so charming.
I loved that place. It was so old, and it was like the walls were stone and they had wood beams in there. It's like, who put these wood beams in? They're so old.
In the cellar, we enjoy some beers while our tour guide gives us a Norwegian history lesson about King Christian II.
Our guide was amazing. She had a cute personality, knew the history. I felt like it was a true representation of Norway.
Before long, it's our last night in Bergen, and we finally see some sun in Europe's rainiest city. The next morning, we say our goodbyes to Bergen and board the train to our next stop. We're now past halfway done with our tour of Norway, and we're getting more and more excited for our family pilgrimage to the village of Hegrenes. Hegrenes is a small hamlet in Vestland County, Norway, about 3.5 hours north of Bergen by car, and only about 3 hours southwest from Geiranger, where we were a few days ago. The village of Hegrenes is flanked by the narrow Hegrenes River to the west and the Jølstravatnet Lake to its south, and hemmed into a valley by rolling mountains. Across the river is the larger village of Ålhus, Collectively, Hegrenes, Ålhus, and several other small villages on the shore of the Jølstravatnet make up an area of Vestland called Jølster. Up until 2020, Jølster was an organized municipality. That year, the county in which Jølster lies, Sogn og Fjordane County, merged with the county to its south to become Vestland County. Norwegians still colloquially refer to the geographic area around Hegrenes as Jølster, as the region is regarded across Norway for its bucolic villages, rich cultural traditions, and pastoral living. Another thing Jølster is known for is art. The famous Norwegian painter Nikolai Astrup grew up in Jølster. He is known for his colorful landscapes of the area, including one of the Ålhus Church, where his father was a priest, and where our ancestors attended service. There's a museum of Astrup's works in his old home on the south shore of the Jølstravatnet, and my grandparents visited this museum 25 years ago. Our family has a few prints of Astrup's paintings. The name Hegrenes comes from the Norwegian hegre, heron, and nese, nose or point, so our name Hegrenes means something like Heron Point. The Nidal name roughly translates to New Valley. In Old Norwegian tradition, families took their surname from their farm, so because our ancestors grew up on Hegrenes farm, they took the name Hegrenes. There were many other laborers who worked on the Hegrenes farm and thus took the Hegrenes name, but were not part of our Hegrenes family lineage. There are other places in Norway bearing the same name or similar names. As our train pulls out of Bergen station, one site we didn't get the chance to visit in Bergen is a road called Hegrenesveien, Hegrenes Way. When my grandparents came here to Bergen 25 years ago, they found this road bearing our surname. Whether it refers to our little village of Hegrenes remains a mystery. But it's cool to know there's a road with our last name on it in Norway's second largest city. After leaving Bergen, we disembark at the small town of Voss. In Voss, we board a bus that takes us toward the town of Gudvangen. On our way to Gudvangen, however, our bus takes a little detour and makes a quick stop at the majestic Stalheim Hotel.
They stopped and we got out and we walked through a hotel, and then there was this most amazing, gorgeous mountain I've ever seen in my entire life.
Breathtaking. It was a hotel very high up above a very deep valley. Even with the rain, it was stunningly beautiful sight in that hotel.
That was incredible. I'm like, okay, we're walking through a hotel lobby, and then you get outside. What is this? It was amazing.
Once we arrive in Gudvangen, we board a quiet little cruise ship that takes us through the Narøyfjord, Norway's narrowest fjord, and the Arlandsfjord. 2 hours later, we make landfall at our next destination, Flåm, an idyllic tourist village at the innermost point of the Arlandsfjord.
Flåm was a lot like Geiranger, very quaint and touristy.
Flåm was really cool. I couldn't believe they got those big, huge cruise ships right up to the port section of the town at the apex of the fjord there.
Once we arrive, we check in at the quaint and historic Fretheim Hotel.
Beautiful hotel. We walked in and there's a true clawfoot bathtub, a true pull chain toilet, which I haven't seen in years. The beautiful hardwood floors, and I thought it was great. They squeaked a little bit when you walked on them.
After some brief respite, it's time to explore Flåm.
I thoroughly enjoyed the train museum there.
I learned at the Flåm Train Museum, those tunnels that we had gone through had been dug by hand by just men and pickaxes hundreds of years ago to make that train go through.
Miles of tunnels. It was just amazing to me. It really, really, once again, made me very, very appreciative of the life we have today. It's unbelievable what people have gone through in the past.
Bear and I took this walk. We walked along the river, then we went up and up and up and up and up and up and up.
You hiked away from the main village about a mile or two, ascended a natural trail with rock and dirt, as it were, and came up onto a vista.
There was this amazing waterfall.
an idea where we're at, we're up a few meters, and that's where we came. How we arrived here was through that fjord, and that's the countryside below us, and we are up here at the falls in Flom.
It's just breathtaking. Just the beauty, there's a calmness when you're right there by the waterfall. So whether you're looking at the water, turning around and looking at the view of the fjord and the small towns and farms below, it was just, yeah, it would be hard not to fall in love with that country.
You just felt like you were part of that country for those moments. You know, I'm a Hegrenes, I belong here. That's what it felt like.
Being up by the waterfall and like breathing in the spray of the waterfall was like it was primal.
Near the falls, my cousins and I find a mysterious gate. Passing through it, we hike up further to another, more secluded waterfall before all of us start making our way down again.
When we were back down on the ground and we walked through the farms, and there was that fuzzy cow.
It was all like farmland. It was like everybody had a farm, and there were, you know, goats and chickens all over the place.
You know, the pigs and the goats just came right up to the fence.
I thought it was so cool just like walking through the farmland and like seeing the animals, and it just like, it all felt like so undisturbed.
Later, after some drinks at a local brew pub, we wind the evening down by skipping rocks into the fjord and enjoying the peaceful solitude of the empty town. The next morning, it's somehow already the last day of our 6-day tour around Norway. We catch our train, the Flåmsbana, a vintage rail line that carries us up 900 meters into the mountains.
It was an older style train, and oh my God, everywhere you look, just gorgeous. If you're looking over here, but then you look over here, there's a little waterfall coming down on this side. It's like, oh my gosh.
After a while on the train, we emerge from a tunnel and park right in front of a gigantic waterfall. Skjolsfossen, 738 feet high.
The sound was amazing to me, and the size of it and the beauty of it, but even the mist that was spraying in your face.
Afterwards, our train crests high up into the mountains at the small and quiet village of Myrdal, where we stop for a bit to await our connecting train that takes us back to Oslo. It's a beautiful 5-hour journey out of the craggy mountains back through Norway's lush countryside down to Oslo.
We took the train to what seemed like was on top of the world. The geography was just weird. There was no trees, it was like mossy rocks, and there were like these little cabins or houses like sporadically every once in a while. And then there'd be lakes up there. I just felt like I was on top of the world.
Once we return to Oslo, we do a little more exploring before spending the evening relaxing in the hotel and reflecting on our tour around the country. In 6 days, we had seen Oslo, Ålesund, Geiranger, Bergen, Flåm, and several other small towns and stopping points. We had explored breathtaking natural landscapes. We had experienced the built environment of Norway's cities. We had ridden nearly every mode of transportation Norway has to offer. All of that was amazing, but really, all of us were most excited for what's yet to come. We had gone on this trip largely to satisfy a desire for a tangible connection to the place our ancestors roamed, and we were still missing that piece. Tomorrow morning, we're finally embarking on a road trip across the Norwegian countryside to our hamlet of Hegrenes, the little place our whole family came from. Tomorrow, we're going home. Waking up that morning, what kind of thoughts or emotions were running through your head since this is the day that we're finally going to Hegrenes?
All right, now we're hitting the Hegrenes part of the trip. We're going to see Hegrenes. We've seen all the beautiful part of Norway, so now are we going to to the ugly part of Norway.
The main reason that we were there was to visit our homeland, as it were, Hegrenes on Ulster Lake.
The first morning of the third leg of the trip was exciting because my adopted dad, Doug Flaw, his side of the family is from a town called Flø, and we actually drove through Flø on the way to Hegrenes. We stopped off at the church, walked around the graveyard, didn't run into any relatives, but at least I got to see and take pictures for everybody. That was just unbelievable serendipity that happened.
Even though I couldn't wait to get to Hegrenes, we didn't try to beeline it because the countryside of that country is so fabulously beautiful. Even as the driver of the car, I wanted to take in the scenery as much as I could and just savor the moments of being there.
The drive was fun to be up close and personal. The sheerness of the cliffs were even more ominous in a car than in a train.
Having this sort of mystical, adventurous feeling within you as you're driving through these areas, waterfalls, the river valleys, the just clean air and clean skies. And then you start going through these tunnels. I had no idea some of these are 6 and 7 miles long.
The tunnels were like peekaboo with like the most, it's like you're in the tunnel and then like the second you're out you see like the most glorious thing you've ever seen in your entire life. I remember at one point there was like a bunch of cows in the road and we had to stop. Like you just have to wait for the cows because they're just doing their own thing.
It was just so incredibly beautiful. I would say, pull over, we wanted to take pictures because it was so beautiful, and later we would have an even better view of something, it just seemed like, why do I even stop? There's always something even better coming up.
Taking that mountainous road, and all of a sudden I look up and I see this blue ice, and I'm like, that's a glacier, and we turn around a corner again, you can see it's even bigger.
Look at that blue ice, what is that? And half an hour away from Hegrenes is the largest glacier in Norway.
And then we go through this really long tunnel, and then we'll come out and there's this huge lake, and sure enough, it was Ulster Lake, and everything, it was storybook gorgeous. Then we're driving along and there's a bus stop and it says Hegrenes.
There it is, we're here.
Hegrenes for the bus stop, Hegrenes on the mailboxes, Hegrenes pointing to the mountain that you can climb, and Hegrenes, 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 Hegrenes we're seeing, and then we get out of the car and we are there.
We arrived at our Airbnb home, which in classic Norwegian style, it had a sod roof, which is unusual. You're not used to seeing that as an American.
Our Airbnb was perfect for our group. It slept 12 of us. You drive up Hegrenes Hill to get to it, and then you look out the back and it's overlooking the lake and Hegrenes down below, and it was just perfect Airbnb for us.
Like it really kind of wrapped up the trip nicely because it really brought us together truly as a family for once. Instead of everyone's got their separate lives, we're finally joining in together as one.
Shortly after we got there, there was this gorgeous rainbow in the sky, and it felt like it's welcoming us. It's welcoming us here. It was amazing. There is a little drawing that Scott inherited of this young girl, little scarf on her head, and she's reading, and it's this drawing that was supposed to be, in Norway. And as I stepped out of this Airbnb and looked out over Hegrenes, Norway, it looked exactly like this drawing to me.
This blessing, this is a very famous Norwegian prayer. My dad used to say this all the time, so I'm going to give it my best shot. Aisenamen gar Vitelbord spisa dricka party dord. De God tilari asi tilgan så varvi mat Aisuna. Amen. And it says, what that means is, in Jesus' name, to the table we go, to eat and drink according to his word. To God be honor, us the gain, so we have food in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Say that in Norwegian.
Those family moments there, like Lexi made us dinner that first night, and Ralph did that Norwegian prayer, like that. How awesome is that? It's so amazing.
When I cook for my family or cook for friends, it's an opportunity to bond together. And we were in Hegrenes. We were in Hegrenes, Norway, to be able to be sharing a meal together in the very village where your ancestors came from. I thought it was wonderful.
And then the sunset that first day, it's gorgeous, you know, on the lake, overlooking the lake.
I had no idea of the stunning beauty of the area. That is a piece of paradise. Hegrenes, Norway is God's paradise for sure.
We had to ask because it was like, why would anyone leave this place? It's so beautiful.
I'm Ingebjørg Erikstad. I'm 70 years old. I'm retired since mid-2021. I live in Førde. It's a small town about 30 minutes drive from the Hegrenes farm. I'm a second cousin of Ralph and Bob, your grandfather. My grandfather was Karson Hegrenes, and he was the oldest brother to Andrew Hegrenes. I got a letter from Scott telling that you are planning for a trip to Norway. I was talking to John and Agnar about this. What to do? What should they do? So we decided to just try to have a family gathering.
I am Agnar Hegrenes, now retired, but I used to work as an agriculture economist. My grandfather, Elling, was a brother of what they call in Norway Andreas, or you call Andrew. Elling was the second brother and Andrew was the youngest one. I have always been interested in history, and also my parents, they knew quite a lot about the family history. Both my mother and my father knew a lot, and I was sorry I didn't ask them too much when I was young. 66. It was Peter and Evelyn. They stayed a few hours on the farm. They came from Nydal, I think, and met some of the relatives. And then Melvin and Ruth, they came in 72 and they visited the farm. And the next day we drove around Ulster and visited the relatives on several places.
In 72, Malvin and Ruth came to Erikstad. I was about 19 years, high school student, and I had to be a translator. In 1998, your grandparents and Vic and Madge visited Norway.
I met them here in Oslo, I think. We visited some relatives who lived close to Oslo, but I was not in Ulster when they was there.
We met at the Eikås Art Gallery in Ålhus for dinner and coffee and cakes and talking together. I think we were about 20 to 25 people. When people are living in different countries and different parts of the world, it's two things. One is the professional perspective, getting to see it on the paper, to look at the names, to see how we are related. And then you have the meetings, the personal perspective, and when you actually meet, you see the people, you shake hands, you get to know others, the humans, and you can build connections and you can strengthen the family ties. So it's, for me, it's this two perspective, and that is important to me.
When we contacted Ingeborg and said, hey, we're here, she's like, oh, come meet us at this little community house. And we said where we were, and she says, oh, just come down the hill.
We drive down the hill and they're waiting at that little community center. And so they walk over to our car and we're all smiles and just kind of like, you must be Ingeborg, you know?
It was like a gift package being opened up. I had no idea that Agnar and Jun were going to be there. When Ingeborg introduced me to Agnar, I didn't realize he was the same Agnar that my dad used to rave about. And once I realized who he was, that was like I said, opening up a nice Christmas present. My father wanted us to name our firstborn Agnar. That didn't fly with Mary Alice very well. So we named him, of all things, Jun, except we called him John. So then we meet Agnar's older brother, and after half an hour I figured out he spelled his name Jon, which is the same spelling of our oldest son's name. I had no idea there were two John Hegreneses in this world, except one of them calls himself Jun. So that whole experience was mind-boggling.
And we walked right down that, not too far. We're like the first farm from that community center was right there.
The tour of the family farm was just breathtaking. It's almost overwhelming, to be honest with you. You know, to think back that our history of our family goes back to all those centuries earlier.
This is it. We're standing on it. This is the Hegrenes farm. You know, this is the place where our ancestors are from.
They still had one of the old original buildings. It was in a bit of disrepair, but they were talking about fixing it up eventually.
They were tearing down some pieces of it, but you can imagine it had been there for well over 100 years.
The fact that we were standing on the same ground and just trying to soak in whatever feelings Andreas and his brothers might have had well over 100 years ago.
We got to go to the older cabin.
Oh, it was built just after Andrew left.
Yeah. So 1905 is when he went to America.
I believe it's like they're not worried that Louise and his wife left in 1905 or something.
I remember Agnar being the best storyteller and like historian, that he just knew everything. If we had a question, he just knew the answer, and he had the little story behind it and how it connected to the family.
Andreas.
So they got married in America.
They married in America, yes.
How did they meet?
I think they worked on some farms around here.
Oh, okay.
I loved that he was able to tell us all that. We were so fortunate that he could do that for us.
After our tour of the Hegrenes family farm, Agnar leads us to the Olhus church.
So we have a tapestry in our dining room of that church. And when we were researching for this trip, it's funny because we put in Hegrenes, Norway in Google or whatever, and a picture of that church would come up. And we just look over on the wall and we're like, hey, that church, it's right there, it's right on our wall.
I was really looking forward to going to that church because that's where people get married and are baptized and all those important life ritual events, you know, and it did not disappoint. It was so amazing. Just to imagine that all the families that came before us that have sat in these pews.
Proud to be a Hegrenes while I was walking through that church. Beautiful church.
It was essentially in the same condition as it would have been when our great-grandfather and great-grandmother, Andrew and Louisa, would have attended church there. And then, of course, my cousin Ralph found a patch of four-leaf clovers right next to the church, so I think that was serendipitous.
But then going to the cemetery out back just to see all the different Hegreneses, the name on all those gravestones, just made you realize, you know, the Hegrenes family's been here. Very surreal.
There's no comparison to graveyards in Norway and the United States. The graveyards are so well kept up. Everybody's got flowers on their graves. Everybody. It was just, you just don't see that here.
Greetings.
from Hegrenes, Norway.
Hegrenes, Norway.
Ingeborg had told us that she had contacted other Hegreneses and let them know that we were coming, and then kind of just as we're about to do this, we find out, oh, they're going to have a gathering for us at this community center. But didn't know much more than that. Didn't know what to expect.
Ingeborg had said, well, I know a couple, Jan and Agnar would be able to join us, so we'll have at least 3 for lunch, but I'll put out the word and see how many, if we can get other Hegreneses to come.
We had no idea that she and Agnar had contacted everybody they knew that were descendants of Andreas and his 8 siblings.
And they came from all over Norway. They came. There were like 60 of us there. It was the most amazing thing. I've never felt so welcomed someplace.
It was almost like a receiving line where we stood in the front and just tried to meet everybody, and I was just all smiles and looking around at the people that kind of look like me and stuff.
My understanding is half the people in that room, all related, had never met each other before. So the fact that a bunch of American Hegreneses were showing up was a catalyst for a major family gathering.
I used the messenger to get in contact with people. I didn't know how many would like to come, but I think we was about 60 persons altogether. I also find much fun in doing this. I like to organize. I like to put people together. So for me, it's funny, and it's a positive thing to do.
Agnar gave his little introduction about why we're all here and who's who, and
Can you please rise those who are related to Johannes?
Agnar asked each branch of the family to stand so you could kind of see who is with whom.
Please rise up so everybody can see you.
And then Ralph gave his little spiel, and he got all, he was very emotional.
Agnar was, I think, 23 years old when my father, Malvin, came here 50 years ago to visit, and Agnar was the host and made that trip very special for him. And so for 50 years, I've been wanting to come here, and we've been here since last Friday, traveling all through Norway on boats and buses and trains and tunnels, and we've seen 1,000 waterfalls, but we haven't seen anything as beautiful as what we've seen right here the last 2 days. This is just a beautiful area that Andreas and Louisa came from. I don't know why they left. So we're just very honored to be here, and very honored that all of you could come and join us. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
That really sunk in that, this is a big deal, right? We got all these people here.
We did the family tree from our perspective before we went, and we sent it to them so that they would have a context of who we were. And when we got there, they had done the same thing and printed it out and had it up on a wall so we could see how everybody there was connected.
Every time we'd meet somebody, we'd drag them over to the wall and say, okay, where are you on this chart?
All of us American Hegreneses split up, so we weren't all at the same table. So Laura and I were at a table with one guy who was a big hockey fan, because there's only one Norwegian that's in the National Hockey League, and he plays for the Minnesota Wild. So when I told him that we live like 15 minutes away from the stadium, he was very impressed by that.
We met some family members who had driven over from the UK, and that was interesting and amazing, and I didn't know that the Hegrenati reached into England.
We talked to Stig, of course, and his daughter,
Liv.
Yeah, it was nice to talk to Stig.
He was like, oh, there were some people who came before, like Bob and Phyllis, and we were like, that's our grandparents. Like, I was kind of surprised that he had like even mentioned them or remembered their names.
And Liv, she was very talkative.
And she was just so cute. Like, when she didn't know a word, she would like whisper to her dad, and he would like whisper back to her what the word was in English.
At our table was an older couple and their grandkids were sitting with us, younger boys like 12, 14 years old.
Tried chatting a little bit with Jon, and I tried to do the Google Translate with him, and I would say something and then, play it back to him in Norwegian. And he just laughed, he wouldn't respond. So he still wanted to talk to, one of the girls he knew, and then she would tell me what he said. But he was so charming, the elder statesman of the family.
And what continued to come through is just how humble, how kind. It was just very down to earth.
Genuine warmth.
Genuine warmth from people.
I wish I could remember all of them. They were so kind. It was a good gathering, and the hospitality was so generous.
After hours of lovely food and delightful conversation with our Norwegian relatives, my cousins and I set out to fulfill a quest.
As soon as we knew that there was like a body of water there, we had to go jump in.
Yeah.
So us kids went to Ralph and Mary Alice's cabin because they were waterfront.
We had the luxury of staying right on the lake in this cute little bed and breakfast place that was a complete stroke of luck, I think.
Beautiful grounds with picnic tables and a fire pit and this incredibly cute little cabin that looked like a step back in time.
It's only gonna take like 5 minutes, not even.
So cool! Then one day, these crazy kids decided they wanted to come and go swimming, and I put my foot in that water and thought, I'm not going in that water with those crazy kids. It had been a beautiful day, and they show up at the door, and it's pouring. And it was pretty cute, because on the count of 3, you all ducked under the water.
3, 2, 1.
We went in, we dunked, and that was
Full dunk.
That was supposed to be
Full
our
dunk. Baptized in the lake of Yolster.
We did it!
Woohoo! Success! These are tough Norwegian kids.
It was so cold, but that was something that we were really set on doing.
That was a highlight, staying in that cabin, because it definitely needed some Hegreneses in that lake. Hegrenes was so green because of all the rain and the moisture. The vegetation is beautiful. The natural flowers, the wildflowers.
Pink flowers everywhere, and I don't know what they're called, but I loved them, and they were so, I made sure I put them in all my pictures because I just loved them so much.
That morning we got up and we walked way back into the Hegrenes land and walked up the mountain.
The road basically follows the Hegrenes River back a couple of miles maybe, and dead ends at a trail.
We could drink from this one.
Oh yeah.
Hey, welcome to Hegrenes, Norway. We just came through all of the farmland that is part of the Hegrenes farm, and now we're up on the mountainous portion, and we're actually ascending Hegrenes Mountain, is what it's called. And this is just one of a couple of waterfalls that we have that are part of the mountainous terrain. That's my family members there going along with us. So, wow, we've really found a paradise here in Norway.
There were areas that were so covered with moss. You had all these like fallen trees and logs, and it's just covered with so much moss that it looked like an enchanted forest out of a fairy tale.
Here we are, Hegrenes Mountain.
I'm so proud that I know that that's called the Hegrenes Mountain or Hegrenes Nipa, and that's the Hegrenes River that's flowing by there. Just so amazing to realize that this is where my ancestors came from. They walked these hills.
I put my dress on like hours and hours before the ceremony.
We were getting ready back at the place, and Jen came out and she had her dress and her flowers, and so we took some pictures out on the back patio, and that was really sweet, and she's so happy.
It's our last night in Hegrenes, which means it's finally time for Barry and Jen's commitment ceremony at the Jolstra Museum at the west end of Jolster Lake.
Welcome everybody, and thank you for being part of our big day.
We make our grand entrance to the song Bear wrote for me, and Bear said some words and thanked everybody for coming.
And it's a song
For Barry and Jen's commitment ceremony, there was a musical component, of course, because they're both musicians. So Barry enlisted a lot of us to be his backup band.
Neil Young is an inspirational musician to me. He came out with an album a few years ago, and they sang this song Eternity. And it was a little love song. So I learned how to play it on acoustic guitar, and then I recruited the other members of the Hegrenati to just play on a chair to play a drum beat. Or I had my bass singers that would just do ba-boom, ba-boom.
When he had brought up this commitment ceremony, and he wanted his obviously his daughter and his nieces and nephews to be a part of it, made me happy because it's something that's such a big part of his life.
Woke up this morning in a house of love. The birds were singing in the sky. Dogs were barking and the deer were free. And we were living in a house of love. Woke up this morning in a house of love. Oh, fortunate me. I hope we're living in a house of love for eternity. Clickety-clack, clickety-clack, ooh, eternity. Clickety-clack, clickety-clack, ooh, eternity. Clickety-clack, clickety-clack, ooh, eternity. Clickety-clack, clickety-clack, ooh, eternity.
The gist of the song is just about a couple driving along, coming up to a railroad track, and the train just goes by and they can't pass by because the train is going by. They're just sitting there holding hands and just realizing how lucky they are to have each other, and that is how I felt, that is how I do feel about my relationship with Jen.
Being a songwriting, guitar-playing musician myself, I just absolutely love the passion that Barry has for it, and the fact that he wanted to display that passion at his wedding, and I was honored to be part of the choir.
And after 12 years of being together, we decided to call it Eternity.
And then I did a song I could barely make it through it. I chose Truly Madly Deeply by Savage Garden. It's an older song.
I wanna stand with you on a mountain. I wanna bathe with you in the sea. I wanna live like this forever.
There's a line in there, I wanna stand with you on a mountain. I wanna bathe with you in the sea. And I just thought that was perfect for us. We did it and we said our little vows to each other.
And now,
Yes, nigh by the
power vested in me by you, I now pronounce us Bjorn, old birdie, Evid. You can kiss the birdie.
I'm going to kiss
This amazes me. We've been together almost 12 years and it's still so fresh.
I thought it was so cute that they chose to have this happen in Norway and that family could be such a part of it. I mean, the love was just oozing through the building. Just a beautiful, really family, heartwarming, personal ceremony.
Ingeborg and Jon and Agnar came to the commitment ceremony, and so we got to say goodbye to them there. And that's when I received some additional photographs of when my parents had visited, and that kind of brought everything back. It's like we are connected to these people. You know, my parents were here, and now we're here, and we're with the same people that my parents were with. And it really did give me that feeling that I'm leaving a part of myself behind here, and it was a difficult feeling.
That was sad. I think Laura felt the same. It was like you just don't want to leave. It was just so wonderful being there. I think we could have just sat there on that back deck of that Airbnb looking at the lake and just soaked that in for another month.
There's a part of me that didn't want the adventure to end, but life continues and you need to move on with your life. But like anything, a trip like this is something will never be taken away from you.
Going back to that area where our ancestors grew up, and it's called Hegrenes, and it just made me feel like that place is a part of me.
What I've told a lot of people was I had certain expectations about the entire trip, and everything far exceeded what I thought was going to happen. It's clean, they're proud of their country, the way they take care of it, and they're as friendly and open and gracious as they could possibly be. Try to live the rest of my life up to the standards they set for us there.
I feel really lucky that we got to do this at a nice young age. That was my first time out in Europe, out of the country, and I know it's for all you guys as well. It makes me want to go back to not only Norway, but a bunch of other places in Europe and everywhere across the world. So I'm hoping this kind of sparks a more adventurous side of my life, yeah.
I feel lucky to have gone when I was younger. Like seeing how emotional Ralph was, seeing how important that was to him was really cool, and it would be awesome to be able to go back and have that same feeling that he had.
Definitely want to go back. I really wish we'd gotten to stay there longer. Can't believe our ancestors would leave that place because it's so beautiful. I'd love to just spend more time in Norway, in Hegrenes again, and just in other places in Europe.
We're very blessed as a family to be able to have a trip like this, because not everyone gets to travel, and there's people out here struggling no matter what part of the world we're in. I was happy that I got the experience. I was grateful, very grateful I got the experience, because without my father I wouldn't have been able to do it. Definitely an eye-opening experience, and I feel like I'm more humbled by it.
Every day I take a step or take a breath, I have that, I'm a Hegrenes. I came from Hegrenes, Norway, and I've been there and seen it, and I get it now. And I can see why it drew my Uncle Dick, my father, and others to go see that. But that's what I reflect on. It's like, first of all, the ability to trace your heritage and to know where you come from is wonderful. But then the ability to literally make it happen, to get into a plane and go over and rent a car and go, and of course have your relatives there to embrace you is the most amazing thing in the world. So when I reflect on the Norway trip, that's really what I reflect on, is that just the ability to be able to do that was so fulfilling. I wish everyone would have that opportunity to connect to their family heritage that way.
When you go on a trip like this, it could just make you so very grateful for what you have. I cannot even imagine what the people who came before us went through in making the decision to have to leave everything they knew and leave their family. And what an opportunity for us to get to go back and reconnect, as I'm sure they never really visualized us doing. They probably never pictured us being able to make trips like this to go back. It gives me an appreciation for how we can keep in touch with people today that you couldn't then. And I see that as a beginning of something, not an end of something.
It reminds me that maintaining legacy and history is an important thing. We have to document where we came from and where we're going. And that is a big part of where we came from. I believe that that connection needs to stay and be remembered like a time capsule, because if history gets lost, it's just not right.
One of the things I've seen in like advice to people on how to be successful is get over your family, right? And I'm like, I love my family and I'm proud of my family, but it makes me realize that there are other people that they don't like their family, or they like going to visit family is a chore and they hate doing it. And I'm like, that's really sad. I'm just glad that I have pride in my family and I don't have to get over my family.
It felt like sort of a chapter of our life was now complete. It just felt like there was a wonderful closure to Hegrenes history and life. We, of course, shared pictures and things with our kids. And Pa said, when are we all going back? Dad, can you rent a boat? How big a boat can we be on? We're going back. And I have a feeling we will be back and write another chapter.
This morning in a house of love, the birds were singing in the sky above, the dogs were barking and the deer were free, and we were living in a house of love. Woke up this morning in a house of love. Oh, fortunate me, I hope we're living in a house of love. Eternity. 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 Then we were riding in my old car along the coast and under the stars. Your hair was blowing and the top was down, and we were heading to my hometown. We kept rolling 'cause you can't go back. Got stopped at the railroad track. The train of love was rolling by. I reached over and touched your hand, waiting on the train of love. Ooh, train of love. Ooh, train of love. Eternal.